Our Major League Fantasy Rugby season is rolling right along, and after 7 rounds of play, we might be finally seeing some clarity with regards to the MLR teams and its players when it comes to fantasy rugby. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 11 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our league members. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers community members. And thank you so much to everyone else tuning in and following along on this fantasy rugby journey in the MLR. And yeah, I think the faces and what our hosts here, Devin Vanderpool and Matt Yee, who are with me as always here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show, I think we can tell by their faces and their reaction here at this open on how round 7 went. But nonetheless, we're going to break it all down. And the way I'm going to start this off here is that in our fantasy league, we've all now played each other once. Everyone in our fantasy league has played each other once. So I think it's a good point in time to kind of reassess here and figure out how people are feeling in our fantasy season so far. I feel like we've had a little bit of a therapy session the past couple episodes because it's been rough for our hosts here. But I'm going to ask you guys again to see if anything has changed. Vandy, Matt, how are we feeling after round 7 of the Major League Rugby season?
Yeah, I mean, I got 2 things. One, I'm a big old weenie. That's one. 2, I've lost so much in this that I officially never played rugby before. So I played baseball and I played ball and hockey. That's the 3 sports I played.
I played ball.
That's it.
You know what?
I guess my question for you, Matt, is it a demotion, I guess, from the paper bag over the head to the weenie jersey? Is that now an even lower lower level that we've reached now?
No, see, now the paper bag is on me, but it's now just everybody's used to it. I'm living the paper bag life without even having to wear it.
Everyone just assumes now that you should have a paper bag on your head.
Yeah, I'm a weenie in a bag.
There we go. All right. And Vandy, I know it was another tough week for you, man. We were talking about it before the show. For you, it's a little bit different. For Matt, I think it's been an all-out struggle for the first 7 weeks.
It's the same. Vandy's never played rugby.
Let me explain myself. Let me explain
I've only
myself.
watched basketball and baseball and hockey. That's the only 3 sports I've played.
No, you know what the thing is? Honestly, it just feels like, when you look at this, you see, okay, I would have beat some teams here. So, I mean, it's not, I'll put it this way, it's not a demoralizing loss. Like, it's not like,
Well, that's what I was just about to say, Vandy, is that I feel like the difference between Salty, everyone can watch. If you're watching the YouTube video here on our channel, you can see Matt and just the anger that is building within him. But the difference between, I think, how Matt's season is going and how Vandy's season is going is that there have been weeks, Vandy, where you have put up some solid numbers and you would be winning some weeks if it wasn't for your matchup. So I think your record would be a lot different had you had been set up with some different teams throughout those first 7 weeks of play. Maybe that's going to change going forward, but Matt, it may not have been that way for the first 7 weeks, but you'll look to change that going forward here. But yes, if you're just tuning in, we are the Fantasy Ruckers. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Make sure you're tuning along and following us along everywhere at the Fantasy Ruckers, everywhere on social media. We're on podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, as we just mentioned, on YouTube as well, where you can follow along our journey in trying to make fantasy rugby a reality and the MLR. And as you can see, it's been a little bit of a tough ride for our 2 hosts here, but it's been a lot of fun for, I think, the rest of our league members, and we're going to break that all down. We're going to break that all down, how players did in round 7 of the Major League Rugby season. I think it was another pretty high scoring week that had a lot of fantasy implication, that had a lot of fun, changed up and shook up I think some of the standings in our league, and we're doing things a little bit different in this episode, guys. I know usually we hop right in with a little bit of news and notes and then we get into the breakdown, but
now we're just going right into how bad we are.
No. I'm gonna delay. We said the first. I believe it was episode 9. We waited about 20 seconds in.
Yeah.
Last episode we waited 10 minutes in. So I'm gonna at least try to hold it off until about 15 minutes in. But I don't know if I'm gonna be able to. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that this episode. But what I want to do here, guys, because the way that the league was scheduled, the statting of this week was a little bit delayed a bit here. So the points that I had statted out came out a little bit later, and you guys are kind of seeing them a little bit more fresh. So we're gonna start off right off the top with announcing kind of the update with our league and how round 7 matchups went. Get your guys' reaction to those matchups, and then we'll go in and break down round 7, because I think the results of this past week's fantasy results are still kind of fresh in your mind, and I think that is abundantly clear with how the facial expressions are being shown by Matt, especially on YouTube.
Yeah,
here.
6 minutes in, newsflash, I still suck.
Well, there we go. Let's hop right into it then with Commissioner Yee's 3 thoughts right off the top of the show.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
That's right. Hear ye, hear ye. Here is Commissioner Yee with the thoughts on our Fantasy Ruckers MLR Fantasy Rugby League. And for all of you who are tuning in, this is a project that we've been working on for quite some time with regards to trying to implement a fantasy rugby system in the MLR. And in 7 rounds in, it's been absolutely a blast so far. I think a lot of our fantasy members, win or lose, I think are having a decent amount of fun. Matt, you can probably speak to that. But let's reveal the results here. And let's start up with our very first matchup. It was the number 2 seed taking on the last place seed in Matt Yee, his Ruck and Roll team, taking on Hokies Dankest Anchors, and falling short here by 13 points, losing 28.7 to 15.8. He just did not have enough. The last minute pickup, Matt, of Eric Naposki on Dallas, who ended up being your top performer with 5.8 fantasy points, scoring that late try that really didn't mean anything for Dallas. It wasn't enough to take down Brock Webster and Riekert Hadding and Kurt Coleman for Hokie. What was your reaction to seeing that?
Yeah, I wish I could have more than 2 guys scoring over 5 points. One of these days, I'm going to get over 20 points as a team. Yeah, I suck. My players suck. I revamped my entire team.
Like, what is that all it's gonna be, man? Is this all it's gonna be every single week, dude? Like, man, you got
silver
it.
lining. I got a silver lining, and maybe this is also a negative, but I played the best lineup that I could have played. Nobody on my bench got any points. So this is the best I was going to do this week, and I did it. 100% of the points.
100% optimal points. So that's a start. So if you can start maybe doing that every single week, I think it's just raising that ceiling. Yep. But I will say, Matt, you did come into this week with a little bit of a different strategy, because the weeks prior you were kind of feeling out and having a little bit of confidence in your team, right? But I think after round 6 and now being 1-5, I feel like you've thrown confidence out of the window, and now you're kind of just going with this spray and pray strategy. The spray and pray strategy, where now it's just whoever kind of looks good in the waiver wires, let's pick up as many guys as we can, because I'm pretty sure in the round 7 waiver wires, I think you might have swapped half of your team, and clearly it didn't work. But I mean, some guys worked. I mean, your 2 pickups were your 2 biggest fantasy performers. So
yeah, I mean,
there is that.
I mean, let's yeah, the 2 pickups were the best fantasy performers. Clearly, I should have been doing this from week 1 just so my losing could have felt a little better. But I'll start off with this. I told you this before the week started, Ryan, and before we got into the weekend games. I had 3 players from last week's lineup that were starting or in lineups this weekend. 3 of them. So I had to make some big decisions, and I had to drop a lot of dudes. And hey, you know what? An all-black World Cup winner, sorry, man, you got negative 3.5 points on the season. You're out. That's how I gotta live. It's a dog-eat-dog world now.
Bye
He's
bye
vicious
ma,
with the
bye
cuts.
bye Nanu. Yeah, the rock and roll absolutely vicious. It's hard to come by with roster spots. There's no patience on that team anymore. You don't
Yeah,
perform your cut.
no
It's just
patience,
a moving
no
carousel.
loyalty.
But I guess that leads to my point, Matt, is that I mean, I guess you've been experiencing firsthand, and I guess I have to say that it is a lot of bad luck, but you have been feeling the brunt, I feel like, of the volatility of what is MLR lineups from a week-to-week basis, because you just said, I mean, 3/4 of your team from round 6 to round 7 weren't in the lineup, and you had to figure out a way to kind of put out a starting lineup. And hey, a silver lining, like you said, you're able to stay competitive in a week. You're able to do that. Is
Competitive
that,
is a stretch, but yeah.
I mean, you got double-digit points.
Competitive.
I mean, within 13. I mean, we've seen worse. So I don't know. Is that, do you think it's just bad luck with you when it comes to that, or is this just something that's just a really big struggle that a lot of people are going to have to continue to deal with in terms of the volatility of the MLR in terms of week-to-week lineup? Because it feels like to me that you're getting a real unlucky share of it as compared to the other teams.
I want to say bad luck. I it makes me feel better when I say bad luck, but but I'm gonna be honest with you. I think it's a combination of bad luck. You know, people get in my lineup and then they get injured and die, and then
you underestimated the talent at the draft. That was the problem. You screwed the pooch at the draft.
I screwed the draft.
Everybody in this league.
I mean, I still think that you can take the title of, I think, the best predictor of these waiver wires so far, because even if you call those shots on this show and you don't make the pickups, they do well, and you did pickups this week and they're the best fantasy performers on your team. So I think you're doing at least something right, which is good. It may not be the original team, like Vanny said, the one that you drafted, but hey, keep making waiver wire pickups, buddy. Maybe eventually you'll get the team that you want and that you can squeak out a few dubs with. So we'll see.
Every week I need to start just dropping all 8 of my starters and just swapping all new guys from the waivers.
I mean, and maybe this is crazy thing, and this is a good talking point, and this is why I wanted to start off this show with this, because I feel like now that we're 7 rounds in, we can really start to dive into different types of strategies and different types of ways you can approach this. Don't shake your head, Matt, because this is a great test. This is a great experiment to have, because you're the very first person to essentially be the worst team like ever.
I'm the first place, worst place.
You're the first worst place MLR fantasy team ever.
Nice.
Does that feel good?
Yeah, no, that's
okay.
That's
well,
really good.
To my point, then
make a trophy for that. That would be great.
Well, we need to take advantage. We need to take advantage of this opportunity and start experimenting with some things here, because hey, maybe this is your chance to start testing out some pretty crazy strategies. And yeah, maybe it's far-fetched to say, Matt, that you drop 8 guys every week and you pick up 8 guys every week, but I don't know, maybe that's the strategy of fantasy rugby in the MLR because of the volatility of lineups. Maybe you just wait until the starting lineups get sent out, and then whoever's remaining on those starting lineups, you just scoop up who's not on your team.
If Sam Windsor is out of the lineup for one more week or on the bench for one more week, I'm like this close from dropping him.
Hey,
I don't even care anymore.
Okay,
I'm not even going to trade him.
Just drop Saunders. Just drop Saunders.
Well, let's just start going down the list of big names that Matthew has dropped already. Bye-bye Ma'ananu. He can go bye-bye. Bye-bye John Ryberg. He can go see you later. And Sam Windsor is on the list. And these are all guys that were top players last year.
Well, yeah, no, clearly.
Except for Ma'ananu, but I mean the name comes with it. But that being said, I think that's enough on your negative matchup and trying to pull out the positives from it. So let's move on here. Matchup number 2, Rugby Morning taking on the Tijuana Hookers. This was a landslide win by Rugby Morning, who looks to have a pretty confident team here. Mark O'Keefe seems to be performing on a week in and week out basis. He put up 8.6 fantasy points for him, and Andrew Coe, man. Dude, he is showing up this season, and we thought and we knew, just knowing his rugby background and having watched him growing up through the ranks, we knew that he was going to be successful in the MLR. But man, he's number 8 now, at least from a fantasy perspective, top 8 in the entire league. He's been scoring on a regular basis. I think that's at least 3 or 4 out of 7 matches that he's scored.
Yeah, I would say he's definitely reaping the rewards of being a winger on that Rugby New York team, because that Rugby New York team moves the ball really well.
Yeah.
And their centers and their team knows how to get the ball.
Veterans, man. Space. They got really good veterans.
Yeah, and we'll break down that matchup in deeper depth there with all the fantasy performances there. But man, it's really exciting to see Andrew Coe doing what he's doing. He might be the steal of our MLR draft. It might be an early call, but he might be the steal. I believe he got taken in the 12th or 13th round early there, and he's in the top 8. I mean, it's a coincidence that he's a friend of the show, Andrew Coe. We were pumped to kind of see him do successful, and the fact that he might be the steal of our draft who went to Rugby Morning. That'll be a really fun storyline and talking point to talk about throughout the season. So Rugby Morning winning that matchup there. Bing Bong Theory, he continues this hot roll, and he's at the top of our league in the standings here, putting up 29 points against Victoria's Secret, who was rolling on his own, but it wasn't enough to take down Wes. It was largely off the back of JP Smith, who had a fantastic game. Started off with an early stolen ball try there at the start. He got 12.6 fantasy points. Hanko Gramicius's performance for Victoria's Secret with 5.1, and Will Tucker with 6.3. Wasn't enough to take down Wes at Bing Bong Theory. So Bing Bong Theory getting another big W there. And then we're going to touch on this matchup a little bit further here, but lads on tour taking down our very own Vandy, the Rucking Goat, who put up 17.3 points to lads on tour's 33.4, who had a whopping performance by Cliven Laubser, who did it with the boot and a big try. Vandy, not necessarily a close matchup for you here, but does it feel better that it was basically off of the hands of Utah players that basically took you down this week? Does that make it feel a little bit better? I mean, Mike Teo and Clive Laubser were the reason why.
If we would have won, then sure, fine. But you not only smoked me in fantasy, but you smoked me in my own players, and they didn't win the game. But no, I mean, can't be upset. I think that's 4 weeks now where the guy I played against put up the best week. So, I don't know. I'm not too mad about it. But Clive and Laubser, Mike Teo, keep doing it, boys. I don't even care. Keep doing it. We need it.
Yeah, Vanny, how does it feel to be at the bottom together? It feels good, eh? It feels kind of nice.
You know what? I expected me to be 8th and you to be 7th, but I'll take it.
I mean, I'm just surprised now that we've wrapped up all the matchups and now that we are where we are, because yes, it will be an uphill battle for both of you to get into a playoff spot, but that is the goal, to hopefully get you guys in the play. But I'm surprised that I haven't heard you guys mention that despite your guys' troubles, at the end of the day, it is a bonus for charity. So there is that. So if you guys keeping that in mind, it may make this season a little less longer than what you guys expect it to be.
Yeah, it's still 8 more weeks of sadness, it seems like, for me.
Well, hey, let's hopefully maybe turn it around. We'll see what strategies we can.
In the next 8 weeks, I got 5 wins. I just got to stop playing the best player that week. I got to figure out a way to do that.
I think we can do it. And Vandy, I think we were talking to, man, I really think that you can get a trade done this week. I want to see a trade done in this time, and I think you can get it done. There are a lot of players who are willing to trade with you, man. We can do it. Get it done.
I hope so, because Yogurt, man, he's spoiled. He's rotten. He's just...
just not cutting it for you. Just
you
big
know what,
goose
Vandy? We
the
should just get
long,
you Niall Saunders. He's dead. I'll give him to you.
No, that's gay. Hey.
No.
As commissioner, I have no collusion in this league. Yeah. No collusion. I'm ending that conversation right here.
Matt. Come on.
I'm ending that conversation right there. But let's move on here, guys. Let's move on now that we talked about our break, our week 7 fantasy matchups. Let's look deeper into the actual MLR games and talk about the fantasy performances had within them and what you guys saw within that may change the outlook of the season that's going forward. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, all of our fantasy teams have now played each other at least once. So I think it is important to understand that I think there's a better understanding of how fantasy rugby operates moving forward. And I think there will be adjustments made by our teams to hopefully turn things around for some or keep the winning streaks going for others. We will see whether or not there's any shift. Well, but that's what I'm saying. You got to be optimistic here, man. Maybe you'll find some strategy that will work for you. Maybe that picking up 10 guys this week may work. We'll see whether or not that happens.
Maybe if I pay you $20 to pick my
just the corruption in this podcast is just ridiculous.
I feel like
I feel like if you were to take And maybe this would be just like good therapy for fantasy sports as a whole. Just take the last like 4 episodes that we've had, right? And just record Matthew and just watch him over the course of the past 4 episodes. And I feel like you can go through like the stages of fantasy sports denial and fantasy sports the emotional roller coaster. And Matthew's at the point where it's just like, I don't care anymore.
He's a broken man. We're dealing with
Just
a broken boy right
This
now.
is called rugby time sadness.
There we go. Well, let's break down the round 7 matchups, guys. We had a lot of really fun matchups. We'll start with the one that happened on Saturday afternoon. The Toronto Arrows taking on the Utah Warriors, with the Arrows coming out on top. They were able to hold off a late Utah Warriors push. They win 27-24, and it was a Utah Warriors team that was kind of rolling and figuring things out. And you were expecting that they were going to be able to take down a Toronto Arrows team that had been struggling throughout the season so far. Vandy, I mean, you're the in-house Utah fan. I don't want to say that maybe we forced you into that Utah fanship and how you're kind of taking that, but the Utah Warriors falling to the Toronto Arrows here. How are you feeling about that, and what did you think about the game, at least from a fantasy perspective, that takes your mind off of your team losing once again?
Well, I don't really own any of the guys in the game, so I can't really talk about it as a fantasy game, but I mean, the comeback was real. I thought it was going to happen. Tough knock on the end to kind of end the game like that. But I mean, poor defense, poor tackling. Mike Teo made a great play on one end of the field, screwed the pooch on the other end. That was tough. The wind, huge factor. I mean, that one ball went right over Saunders' head and led to a try. That was tough. But I mean, Toronto was facing the same wind, so you hate to kind of use that as an excuse, but I don't know. Tough loss all around. It truly was just tough to see after coming off a big guilt.
Now I'll shift over to Matt. Is this kind of the nail in the coffin in terms of what we know with this Utah Warriors team? I mean, there was a little bit of optimism coming off that historic win a few weeks ago. Then they were able to continue the win last round, and now this kind of gets a setback because the Arrows, to be honest, needs to be a team you're going to beat if you're going to compete with those top teams like Rugby Atlanta, like Rugby New York, like even the Gilgronis, who are a little bit of a slump right now, which we'll get to. But Utah Warriors not really a team that is going to be competitive this year after this, or is this more of them just not showing up and just making the mistakes, Matt?
I think they're a team that can probably pull out a win, a big upset win here and there, but at the end of the day, they don't look as good as the Seawolves, as good as the Rugby New Yorks, the Rugby Atlantas.
Which is, sorry to cut off, but it's funny to look at it like that. Like even Seattle, they beat us by 3 points. Toronto, they win by 3 points. If those games go the other way, now we're like, you know what I mean? And that's the great part about sports. But if both those games go a little bit the other way, boom, Utah's playoff team, we got a chance at winning it all.
Yeah, but I look at it that way, and like let's look at this Toronto game for example. Yeah, you make one mistake, it's a huge mistake, or 2 mistakes. Now Saunders lets the ball go over his head with the wind. Mike Teo decides that he's going to chuck a ball with like 50 feet in the air and say, "Oh, screw it, Toronto can have this one." Like those things are not what you like. Is not how you win close games in the end of the day, anyway. Right
now,
so, and you can't get that from your like one of your best players. Like those mistakes cannot come from Teo. They cannot come from Saunders.
Championship teams find ways to win games all the time. In football, for example, whether your special teams, defense have to pull it out and get a touchdown, or good teams find ways to win. And these 2 losses, these close losses, are just it might not be the year. Just if you can't find a way to win the game.
But you say that they almost found a way to win. Yeah, and then they make a mistake to blow, right? So that's the exact story of why they're losing these close games.
Well, I guess that's my point, guys, is that to be to talk about the other side of it is that maybe it's not such a the way that you're losing because these mistakes are being made, but you could argue that those are are things that can be fixed easier than other problems. If it was a structural issue, if it was a skill issue, of not having the good enough play, but they have the players. Like Mike Teo was formerly known as one of the best player in the MLR. You have explosive players like Niall Saunders. He's looked good at times. Mika Cruz has looked good at times. Cliven Lauser looks fantastic. And you have incoming help as well. I mean, you're waiting on Paul Lasik to come in, who's going to be adding some of that professional help overseas, moving from the Harlequins. So maybe you could argue that you have the skill there, the pieces are there. It's just these mental mistakes that are being made that are hurting you. You could argue that, championship teams don't make that mistake. But once again, we're only just past the third way through the season. So some of these errors still need to be worked out. But at the same time, we also are a third way through the season, and there aren't many weeks left for you to kind of crawl back, especially with the start that Utah has had. So, kind of can go both sides of it. I'm on the fence with Utah right now. I want to see them succeed just because, Vandy, I want you to have a team in the playoffs, and I want you to be following along with the team. But hey, I guess this is the roller coaster of joining and becoming a fan of a brand new team. You never know what you're going to expect heading into a brand new season. So it's definitely been a roller coaster for you. So just naming some names here from a fantasy performance that did well. Like we mentioned, Mike Teo and Cliven Laubser, both owned by Lads on Tour by JJ. They were putting up double-digit fantasy points. Vandy, you really can't do anything about that when you're going up against guys that put up 10 points, 16.4 points. And like I said, I think that's just a perfect example about, not necessarily a team being successful from a rugby standpoint on the field, but from a fantasy perspective, if there's points to be had, doesn't matter if you throw away, at least in our rules, it doesn't matter if you're throwing away dumb passes. Mike Teo's still putting up 10 points and still putting up at least high power fantasy performances that are winning people's weeks. So there is something to be said there. Connor Burns as well, adding 10 points as well as there for the Utah Warriors. And then on the
young
Toronto
kid, you look good.
Yeah, the young kid, he's looking pretty good. And then Toronto Arrows, not as many fantasy points, but some new faces putting up some numbers here. Denon Robinson Bartlett, he putting up 9.2 fantasy points. And Brock Webster, man, he looks pretty good on the Arrows. He had 9.3 points this week. Somehow Hokie was able to drop him last week, and then somehow look into the future, pick him up this week, and then of course the week that he picks him up, he scores a try. So not too sure what magical ball that Hokie has at home.
He's got a news site he's not telling us about,
right, or something like that, because I have no understand how he's predicting.
Like I said,
some of
Adam
his performances.
Schefter, man, this guy's got deeper roots than we know.
He's got sources. We gotta contact him, man. Maybe there's got to be an investigation here about these sources that we have. Maybe there's got to be regulation, but we'll see. But so some big fantasy performances there by Webster, 9.3 points, and then Ronan Foley coming in there with 6.2, and Jack McRogers, Matt, your boy, coming back-to-back weeks with a try, and he doesn't start and doesn't play that many minutes, but hey, he seems to be finding the try zone late in the game here. I don't know. Maybe it's to that point about maybe picking up one of your buddies there, or that strategy that we were talking about earlier in the season about maybe there's just some guys that have an act of finding the try zone later in the match there.
Yeah, I think old Jackie boy might be part of the whole team rebuild, reshuffle.
Yeah, it might. Maybe we'll have to throw it in there, and we'll see whether or not Jack could maybe get you into the playoffs. That wouldn't be something there, but we'll see.
I might have to keep him as a lifer over here.
There we go. Hey, you never know, and it'll be fun, and it'll be fun to have him on your team, and if we could bring him on the show as well, because we are still trying to see if we can bring you guys out there some interviews here, some players we're going to try to bring on. We've had Andrew Coe. You can look back at a couple episodes that we've done with him, and we're going to hopefully bring on some more MLR players onto this podcast for you guys to hear the perspective of some players in the actual league on their thoughts about fantasy rugby and the MLR. We should be able to get that for you guys in the episodes to come. But with that being said, let's move on to some more matchups here. Before we get into it, kind of a jumble of matchups here this weekend. Kind of getting sidetracked here. What was your thoughts, guys? I mean, it feels like the weeks before we were able to have kind of spread out matches. We had a match on Friday night, kind of a prime time ass matchup, and then Saturday afternoon, a couple on Saturday evening, and then a few on Sunday. Today, or this past round, it seemed like all of them were on Saturday, all at the same time,
8 o'clock.
and then only one match on Sunday. Made it pretty difficult for us to kind of keep track of everything and find the time to watch all those matches with them kind of conflicting with each other. Not too sure why MLR did that like that this week, but kind of your idea. I know we were talking about that, and that was kind of an annoying thing that we had to deal with.
Yeah, it seems like MLR, maybe if they keep this up, maybe they just don't want people to watch.
That's gotta
know,
be
man.
it. We got
What's your thoughts though? Do you think they need to take kind of that NFL approach in terms of having those primetime games, having that singular Friday match, marqueing that Saturday night match, or is it just spread it out so people can see it?
I mean, there's 6 games. Like, what is there's 6 games a week, right? Six games a week. There's not enough games in a weekend to justify putting 3 games at the same time on one
Fair
night.
enough.
Yeah.
I mean, they had 1 game on Sunday. What the heck else was on Sunday that they needed to have 1 game on Sunday? Like, I don't understand why they're nowhere near the NFL. There's no like regional channels and regional support. Everybody's watching every game because if you're a fan of rugby in the US, you're a fan of the MLR. Unless you're
they're
going
all
to the
accessible.
game,
It's
so.
not like they're getting blacked out or anything. You go
Yeah.
on the Rugby Network, you can watch all the games. Sometimes they're on Fox Sports, or sometimes they're on other channels in your local area, but they are all available on the Rugby Network. So yeah, I'm looking at the schedule right here, and the reason why I bring it up, I mean, we had the Guiltinis, the Legion game, which we'll talk about right here at 7:00 on Saturday, and then you have Nolah Gold, Rugby New York, Dallas Jackals, Seattle Seawolves, AG, and the Free Jacks, all at 8:00 on Saturday. And how are you expected to bring viewership to watch that? I don't know. It's just something that I noticed that not only made watching the games a little bit more difficult to kind of follow along, but I'm sure it made newer fans also kind of more difficult to, navigate around different games and just have it enjoy. I mean, like, how fun is it to just enjoy a day of rugby? Have a game at 2, you watch that game, you throw it on there's another one at 4, like kind of like that football Sunday where you just have a continuous day of football.
Yeah, I mean,
why not create something like that with rugby where, Saturday, Sunday, just have a continuous stream of games? Because I think a lot of the fans that you're going to catch, or maybe the people that are flipping through channels that might come across Fox Sports, like, hey, I'll watch. I haven't seen that before. Or if they're on the Rugby Network, at least you can throw on, a single game and focus on it rather than being sidetracked by 3 different matches that are happening at the exact same time. But I think we're all on the same page with that. But yeah, let's talk about that Guiltini San Diego Legion match. I don't know, guys. They must have heard us last episode. They must have not been happy about me giving him the last place ranking in terms of fantasy, having fantasy players on that team, because they showed up this weekend against the San Diego Legion in the Battle of California, winning that match 26-13 at home at the LA Coliseum. Matt, I'll go to you first. Initial thoughts. I know you love the Guiltinis here, and you've been making that clear all season long. Thoughts on this match as they look to turn things around and seem like they may be back, the Guiltinis of old.
Yeah, looks like they figured out how to score tries.
There we go.
When they got the ball down into the opposition 22, so they figured that out. But no, they actually look a lot better. They look a lot more structured. I do like the combo of and
Yeah.
and
42, baby.
and Luke Burden at 12. I like that combo. And I mean, if they have that structure down like that, what is the point of bringing those other guys back and trying to inject those guys in the lineup when that didn't work out before?
Well, I guess yeah.
They were always dominating teams. Like, I mean, you can look at the statistics. They carry the ball. Even in all of their losses, they haven't been outdone yet. Sure, on the scoreboard they have, but they were just having a tough time scoring. They still dominated in ball carries and breakdowns, and it's the same thing this game. It was 12 penalties. They just figured out a way to score, and honestly, if they could figure out a way to score, they are the best team in rugby. Just because of their pure domination, man. Like, it honestly is just pure domination the way they can hold the ball.
And that's what I noticed too, was that it was a familiar possession game, like you're saying, Vandy, where they can, really dominate that and keep that. They're just not finishing tries, but it seemed like, Matt, to your point, that there were just some finishing structural plays that they're able to get. I think it was like Bill Meeks that got in there moving in, and they were able to find on the inside there and everything. So it just seems like there's a little bit more flow. And I guess my question is then to you guys is that, and you mentioned it quickly there, Matt, was these bigger names are going to start returning. I mean, you're going to have Matt Gateau come back. You know, I don't know what his injury status is right now, but the expectation would be that he would be back in the lineup when he comes back, unless he's considering, you know, he did say it's probably his last season, I believe. So maybe he thinks of early retirement. I don't know. But do you put those big names back in, or do you trust the 42-year-old that has come in middle of the season and at least has looked like to turn around in this past match and go with kind of the guys that start to find the footing here? Because I think they have an interesting decision to make going forward.
Well, I think they have a cool dynamic, to be honest. Like, you know, I know he's 42 and everything, but he's a coach. And to play, you know, how many players have got to play with a coach before? It's almost like an on-field, like, helping hand. You know what I mean? And, you know, it's like in the movies, or it's like, get out of my way, kid. The coach puts the helmet on and he does the damn thing. He's the quarterback. He leads the team. And I don't know. I don't know how much of a dynamic that truly brings, but
to that point, they had I believe Adam Ashley Cooper last year was also a player coach, because Adam Ashley Cooper is one of their coaches now.
Okay.
So I believe last year was a player coach. So maybe that's the key. Maybe they need to have a player coach.
I just mean it's a cool dynamic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
It is unique. It's unique in a way where you don't see that in many other sports. Like you don't see that in, you know, in at least North American sports where there's a player, at least not in the top level. So it is
closest
interesting.
thing we ever seen in the NHL is a Zamboni driver.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah,
But,
leave it to the Tilsonbergian to bring up the Zamboni driver showing up at a hockey game. There we go.
To your question though, Ryan, I mean, I think at the end of the day, obviously, once Giddo's healthy, he comes back in the lineup. Once Lesage is healthy, he comes back in. Once DTH says, I'm done being the team mascot, he'll come back in the lineup, you know. And they'll come back in and they will be better.
I noticed you didn't say a name
talent, and I think they'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think you forgot out a name.
No, that guy's never come back.
Yeah.
That guy's never come back.
Once I pick him up, baby.
Why the heck would you want him back when this guy just stands on the sideline?
You can't leave him out there. I don't know, but Vandy, he is available. So hint, if you want a piece of that in this upcoming round 8 waiver wire, he is available for you.
There's got to be a rhyme or reason
Ryan,
why
on
nobody
show,
picked up.
If I tap my nose after you say a free agent, that's a $5 fab bit, okay?
There we go.
You know, nobody picked up who I dropped. That's got to be that's got to say something about the team I had. I thought, oh, somebody's got to jump on one of these guys.
That is true. I mean, that means, okay, well, at least you did the test. At least people in our league would not pick up half of the team that you had. The bottom half that you dropped. From my team so just start going up the list. There we go.
So anybody that I've had, I can pick right back up again.
But yes, I think to your point, Matt, I think it is interesting that I think if there's any league where really high skilled big name players can really just hop in and make a difference, it would be in this brand new growing MLR league. Names like Gateau, like DTH, like Ben Lesage. They're big names, and then they have shown success in the past in the MLR and in, you know, better leagues too, and on the international stage where they should just, you know, move in there seamlessly. And I will note that this Giltini's team, since week 1, since round 1, has really not had a healthy team and has not put out a side that was the same side as that championship winning team as last season. So I don't think, I know I went on a little rant and a hot take last week of saying that I would not take any fantasy players from this team. I still kind of side with that because I think there is still a lot of unpredictability with this team, and I'm not going to allow one performance against, now mind you, it was against a good San Diego Legion side, but it is still one performance. They are still figuring things out. Let the dust settle a little bit. But hey, maybe this is the week to start hopping on Giltini's guys. Hint, hint. Maybe there are guys that are in the free agency that could be long-term plays. Maybe you're in a playoff spot. Maybe, hey, Bing Bong Theory, Rugby Morning, Victoria's Secret. You guys listening who are at the top, who may have the affordability to make kind of these riskier moves. Maybe Matt Gateau is a guy you look at because later in the season, when he gets healthy in round 10, 11, 12, as you approach your playoff runs, maybe he he's a guy that starts getting inserted in the lineup and he's a full-time boot, ball carrier, decision maker that's going to get a lot of points if he's given that opportunity, maybe we start looking there as well. But an interesting tidbit to have with this Giltinis team. Just a really interesting storyline, especially when it comes to fantasy as well. It has been this LA Giltini cycle has been an absolute roller coaster when it comes to fantasy performance and emotions, as it has been made clear with certain players, with Vandy and with Matt, of course. But some players that were top of this game, at least on the Giltinis, 5.1 fantasy points for Hanko Gramicious. Will Chambers put up 6.5. Marco Fepalue, 5.2 points. Oreen, he put up 6.3 points as well. So some performances there from the Giltinis. And then looking on the San Diego Legion side, Joe Peterson, Vandy, he may be the most consistent player in fantasy rugby right now. He hasn't had any flashes of like really, really impressive matches, but dude, if you look at just like his weekly performances, dude, okay, so week 1, 10 points. Week 2 didn't play. Week 3, 10 points. Week 4, 9 points. Week 5, 4.5 points. Week 6, 7.5 points. You know what I mean? Like every single week, he's just putting up a solid number. And yes, I know that hasn't translated into wins for you, but I will say that I think a lot of the similarities between the teams in our fantasy league that have been winning, the very first key, and I see Matthew nodding his head, and I think he knows this. The very first key to having a team that is successful, at least in our league with the rules that are set in place right now, is to have that player on your squad that is consistent from a week into week basis. You have certain teams like, that have Andrew Coe, who are putting up tries at Rugby Morning Success on there. And you have Joe Peterson, Vandy, and maybe he'll be your key to getting back in this whole loop. He's been looking fantastic all season long, at least from a consistency basis.
I remember when I drafted him, somebody drafted like what was supposed to be his backup in like the 8th round. And the chat went nuts and everyone's like, Vandy's, all scared. I'm like, what am I scared of? Sorry. And they're like, oh man, Joe, he's 37. I'm like, no.
I feel like at this point, man, you just got to embrace that you have like the old grandpa team. Now that you have Joe Peterson and you have Oreen,
listen, before you start saying old, okay? Being a father now, you gain a little bit of strength, okay? And the older you get, up until about 45, you start getting dad tough. These guys are dad tough.
It's the wisdom, man. It's the wisdom. It's that extra wisdom on the rugby pitch. It's really translating to fantasy points, man. So some other fantasy performers from San Diego. The other one, Kainoa Lloyd, 10.8 fantasy points. He came through big as well. And I'm pretty sure, I was talking to Matt about this, and I'm pretty sure this is the same Kainoa Lloyd that when I was playing at Bill Crothers, I believe with Coe. I'm pretty sure Coe was on that high school team. I don't know. He wears a mustache
now, so you wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah, he's an imposter.
Yeah,
I can't tell who he is, but I'm pretty sure, Vandy, I played against Kainoa Lloyd in high school. He went to Streetsville, and I'm pretty sure we played him at provincials, and he was a damn good player back then, and clearly he's showing that he's a pretty damn good player in the MLR2, scoring a pretty explosive try there.
Joe Peterson did all the work on that one.
Yeah, well, Joe Peterson was a nice offload, and Kainoa Lloyd took it to the house. Got to be quick there, shaking off a tackle or two. 10.8 fantasy points for Kainoa Lloyd in that one. So 2 big fantasy performers for the San Diego Legion overall for that squad. So let's move on to the next match here, moving into that 8 o'clock series of matches. The Nolah Gold taking on Rugby New York in New Orleans. Rugby New York, man, they just look like they continue to roll on, and I know that Nolah isn't really a team that is competitive this year, but Rugby New York, I mean, they still need to come out with dubs, and Utah wasn't able to do it against a weak Toronto Arrows team. And like we said, good teams get wins when they need to get wins, even if it's not their best performance. And Rugby New York came out with a big dub this week, 30-19.
You got to put up points against these guys, and when you win, when you're a good team, you win big against these teams that are maybe at the bottom of the table. And it was a weird lineup this week. I mean, they had Andy Ellis at 10. And they didn't even have Sam Windsor or Jack Hyden really in. Sam Windsor came off the bench, but if you can win wins like that with kind of some guys not in the lineup, some of your key guys not in the lineup, then you're looking good. You're golden. That back line looks filthy.
Was that your plan, Matt? Maybe your plan wasn't to draft separate Andy Ellis and Sam Windsor. Drafting both Andy Ellis and Sam Windsor was like an amalgamation of one Andy Windsor, like kind of just all together. Now he's just one player, because I've never seen that before. The expectation, obviously, going into the season was Andy Ellis was going to get most of the minutes at scrum half, Sam Windsor was going to get most of the minutes at fly half, and you were going to reap the rewards of having that pairing. And it looks like now they're just sharing time at the fly half position. Andy moving out of fly half, and you got Connor McManus and Connor Buckley taking over the reins there at scrum half.
Yeah, so I did the perfect thing. I got both of them, and they both now get 0 points together.
So is that the goal? That was the goal the whole time. It's keeping with the theme of your team. If you're gonna be at the bottom, you're gonna do it right.
Yeah, I gotta suck the right way.
Own it, embrace it.
So some big fantasy performers from this Rugby New York team, like Matt said. This back line looks absolutely explosive. They look like they're able to capitalize on big time tries. Jason Emery scoring 11.7 fantasy points for Rugby New York, and then Andrew Coe capitalizing as well, scoring 8 points of his own early in that match. It seems like this Rugby New York team, there's a lot of points to be had because they put up a lot of points. At least from a rugby perspective, which is going to obviously translate to fantasy points in our league. Really, I don't think there's much else to be said with this Rugby New York team. I think they've proved that this is one of the teams to beat this season in the MLR. And if you have any Rugby New York shares outside of Andy Ellis and Sam Windsor, in terms of that back line, you're looking pretty good. And I will say, if it adds any easiness here, Matt, it was Sam Windsor celebrating his 50th cap. One of the few players to do that this past week. So not that there's any fantasy points for that.
Fantasy points for that, right? Let me know.
Why don't you propose another rule, just like how we said that that Rugby Morning had to get minus 50 because of not playing Coe. Maybe because now any player that reached the 50th cap milestone gets 100 points.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds
good, except it passed now, and now I don't even get it.
Too late. Yeah, there we go. So that's the Rugby New York. And then just looking on the Nolah side, I mean, I feel like this team is on and off. You have players that can perform on a week basis. I mean, Carl Meyer, he is usually pretty good with the boot. He got 4 points in this one, but it wasn't him who's really stood out. Devin Short and Nick Feeks were really the top fantasy performers in this one, 7.2 fantasy points. So. And Nick Feeks did come off the bench too, and that just goes back to the hard predictability of some of these score triers here. It's not always going to be the guy that logs the most minutes. Sometimes it's going to be that sub that comes in, and even if he's not a starter and you see him on the bench, you could take that risk and putting him in your lineup because the opportunity to score tries is always there. Mind you, it also being risky to kind of predict that because knowing how these guys have played and you guys are obviously knowing firsthand 7 rounds in, it's not easy to predict where those tries come from on a week-to-week basis. Yeah. Moving on here to the Seattle Seawolves Dallas Jackals matchup. I think the biggest thing out of this matchup, the 34-12 win over Dallas for Seattle in Arlington. Man, are the Seattle Seawolves back? Are they making a push here to be one of the competitive teams in the MLR after being one of the dominant franchises early in this MLR development here, winning 2 titles in this league? Not really being as competitive last season, but man, this team looks like they can score at any point in time, especially with the athletes that they have on the squad.
Yeah, they look real good. I mean, Ryberg Hadding is literally causing havoc for that team and always making gain lines. Seems to be everyone on the field at once. I mean, yeah, with this game, Seattle looks real good. It looks like they can. Again, it's against Dallas. But
it's against Dallas.
Dallas is known to put up points, and I mean, they stopped Dallas from getting points, even though a little, I guess, asterisk is the fact that Dallas got hit with a joke of a red card.
Yeah, Matt Fringe is getting the yellow card there.
So just about that play,
or red card,
I was watching that. Matt Fringes gets the red card with an open hand to the face. Sure, whatever. That was pretty far away from whatever the guy on Old Glory DC did to the Toronto Arrows, punching him, socking him right in the eye. But at the same play, I watched Kieran Joyce die. And I started him as my kicker. 30 minutes in, he dies. No more kicks for him. No more points for me. Boom. That's it. That's it for him.
How many times I want to know, and if you're one of our listeners, maybe you can count out there, but how many times does Matthew bring up a solid rugby point and his knowledge of rugby from his rugby playing days seeps through, and then he circles back to just remember, just by the way, my fantasy team sucks, and he got 0 points. Every single point is like,
I don't want to talk about my fantasy team. It's like my
disclaimer. It's my disclaimer here. This is what I'm going to say, but just remember that I don't know how to use that knowledge for anything for fantasy. So maybe don't listen to what I have to say.
Well, hey, I will say that the 2 big fantasy scores for your team, Matt, came from this match, coming from Eric Naposki on Dallas, and then obviously your injured Kieran Joyce, who couldn't make it through the game.
He's not injured, he's dead.
He ended up getting 5 fantasy points. Big performers, we mentioned it earlier in the show, 12.6 fantasy points for JP Smith. He had the early stolen ball try that he got early in the match, along with quite a few try assists. And I think that's what the expectation was for a true 9 and the performances of 9. And this is one of the things I think in reflection of this league that I will kind of talk about is how the 9 position really hasn't been a source of points that I thought it would be. I thought there would be a lot more try assists from 9s, and I thought they'd be able to put a lot more points, but we haven't seen that yet, at least in the 2022 season so far. But at least in this match, JP Smith showed what a 9 could do and the performances they could have, especially when you add a try to that mix along with those try assists. I mean, 12.6 fantasy points are going to win you the week every single week. And then you have Tavit Lopetti. Matt, you mentioned Reichert Hadding. He scored 6.3 points. Tavit Lopetti, 7.2. Kieran Joyce scoring 5, like we mentioned. And then Matt Turner, 7.1 fantasy points for Seattle. And then just looking on the Dallas Jackals side, 5.8 fantasy points for Eric Naposki. Fantastic pickup, Matthew. Just down to the wire. Matthew Hood wasn't in the lineup for Toronto Arrow, so quick. Hokie must have lent you the future all-seeing rugby ball to see who was going to score a try in that match.
Yeah, he said, here, this guy's going to score a try, but let me whoop your butt in this matchup.
You were like a homeless guy on the sidewalk. It was a loony. He's like, here you go, kid, you need one.
It was a pity pickup, exactly. It was a pity thing. Matt Fringes, like we said, I think it's become abundantly clear how detrimental getting a yellow card or a red card is from a fantasy perspective in our league can be. Luckily, no one had Matt Fringes. I think he was on a lineup earlier in the season, but he was dropped. I forget who had him rostered, but if you had him started, he would have had -8 fantasy points. And imagine if you had that. I mean, that you would probably lose that week. Chad London getting a yellow card -4, and then the only other positive performer on top of Naposki for Dallas was Adrian Boyson with 5.5 points. And I will mention the Jackals set piece bonus point did get 2 points as well for a try assist. Not as many try assists from set pieces this week that we have seen in
previous.
They
were money on their line out though.
Yeah. I mean, the set piece for Dallas has looked pretty good in certain stages. I mean, that's what convinced Matt to pick them up in round 2. And he was bamboozled
I
for
picked
that.
them up, and then they stopped doing good, and then I dropped them, and then they started doing good again. So I don't know what's up with that.
And the counter is at 2 for how Matt's fantasy team is doing.
Dominic Akina, can you pick him up, drop him, and then I'll take him back?
Yeah. I'll pick him up. I'll drop him. I'll just be your extra lineup.
Thanks.
You're just gonna be the fantasy player launderer for this league. Everyone's just gonna filter their players through you to make them fantasy.
I'll be people's extended bench.
Okay, you don't import, you don't export, you just hold our money for us.
Yeah, and you just gotta give me some fab in exchange. That's it.
Well, let's move on here, guys, as we have 2 matchups here left in round 7. The last one, at least, on Saturday. AG, the Austin Gilgronis, taking on the New England Free Jacks. And it was a very good match. And these are 2 top teams in the league right now. So it was competitive. We mentioned it last episode. This is one of the matchups that we were most looking forward to. And it came down to the wire. And it obviously had to end in a controversial call as well. But the New England Free Jacks look good. And this was out. Bodine Waka, he didn't start. He did make an appearance, and he did end up still getting a couple fantasy points as well with one conversion. And so even coming off the bench, he finds his way to get onto the score sheet.
He's so silky smooth.
Oh my god!
And the New England Free Jacks look good, man. And the Gilgronis. I mean, ever since I talked about that chink in their armor and that blemish that they have, they've faced good teams these past couple weeks, and they haven't come out with wins after starting undefeated. Again, it's against a tough New England Free Jacks team, and I think the Gilgronis are still going to put up fantasy numbers, but I'm not too sure if the people in the hype train is as high as it once was for this Gilgronis team.
Honestly, I think if they were better disciplined, like they had so many penalties, yellow cards.
They got 2 yellow cards. They were down
but
to 13 men at one point.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, though. And I think that to a point, and you say, okay, they lost the game because of yellow cards, but why are they getting the yellow cards in the first place? And this is an issue. Right. This is an issue that we've been talking about with this Gilgronis team since day one, is that they've had opportunities to score and they sometimes shoot themselves in the foot because they take a bad penalty within the 22 meter, within the 5 meter line, and they can't capitalize. So they leave games close. But then because of the talent that they have, they're able to come back late in games. There've been plenty of times where they got into halves scoreless or losing, and they've had to use a dominant second half to get back in this matchup. And you're not going to do that against a solid New England Free Jacks team. This is something that we said in weeks prior as well. And I guess to the point of what we were saying about the Utah Warriors is that at least it's a problem that can be fixed. You can work on discipline, right? You have the skill there, you have the structure there. We've seen you come out big wins because not every single team, can be down at half and have the resilience and have the fortitude to come back and win those matches and have those dominant second half performances. So it's there if they can piece it together, but they're just going to have to fix that discipline like Vandy, like you're saying. But I think from a fantasy perspective, which we'll get into right here, I think it's completely fine. I just don't think, at least from just a rugby perspective, I think there is still concern to be had with this Gilgronis team. So let's talk about some of those fantasy performances and kind of break it down and talk about whether or not those penalties hurt the Gilgronis from a fantasy perspective. Big players here. Mark O'Keefe once again coming huge, 8.6 fantasy points. The way he hits the line, man, I don't know what it is, but the pace he has, he's able to get through, and it's just so explosive, and hands get on, but it just doesn't seem that anyone's able to tackle him down. This, and just kind of how we had that conversation about JP Smith and the scrum half position. This is what I kind of expected from dominant center positions, is having these few select guys that are able to have this line busting power, where you're going to be able to have these 20+ meter tries, because these centers, they're setting up these plays for inside center crashes. Haven't seen it as much, but we have seen it from Mark O'Keefe this season.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man. The guy's been absolute money all year.
Yeah, and some other fantasy players, Lockheed McCaffrey, he cashed in as well off of a set piece try, 5.7 fantasy points. So really not that much fantasy output here from a Gilgronis team that we're pretty much used to seeing fantasy output. Julian Dominguez not getting any points here, and really only the performers were those two that we were saying, was Mark O'Keefe and Lockheed McCaffrey. Even Mac Mason, who has been pretty money from the boot, only 2.5 fantasy points, who was on Hokies bench. Gilgronis set piece getting 2 points as well, with the try assist for that set piece try off of Lockheed McCaffrey. And then moving over, I think, to what more people want to see, because I mean they have the highest scoring player on their team, the New England Free Jacks. Like we said, Bodine Waka did not start this match, still getting 1 fantasy point with that conversion. But the big players here, we've seen this name before, who has scored a try. Paula Balakena scoring 7.4 fantasy points. Dougie Fife, he's starting to make his return back in as a regular in this lineup, 6.6 fantasy points there. And then a new coming here, Zach Bastrez, I think saying it right, 6.6 fantasy points for him. So New England coming out on top. And like we mentioned, it comes down to the wire. I don't think we need to get into too much depth about it, but there was a little bit of controversy at the end of this match. It could have, Gilgronis could have made it closer, maybe could have squeaked out with the win, but there was their TMO no call against that DeWall try. Some discussion whether or not he was or wasn't offside, but nonetheless, if you're not getting those penalties, maybe you're not in that position to have that close of a matchup. So
you get 2 single cards, you shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
There we go. So New England Free Jacks winning 1 by 8 in a pretty big matchup there. And then lastly here to wrap things up, don't really need to spend too much time on this matchup. I think it's pretty abundantly clear we knew who was going to be winning this matchup heading into this. Rugby Atlanta taking on Old Glory DC, 27-13 for Rugby Atlanta. Rugby Atlanta, I had them at the top of, or was thinking about putting them at the top of my fantasy rankings. They look like they're a team that is continuing to make that statement that they should be at the top of the fantasy rankings. A statement win. Again, it's kind of like the Seattle Seawolves win, where it's hard to judge because it's against a weak DC team. But hey, good teams are gonna make statement wins in these types of games, and Rugby Atlanta made a statement win here.
Yep, and I mean, I sympathize with DC. I mean, we both suck. It is what it is.
Number 3.
We both
Three for three.
faced the one or two team in the league. We both took an L. DC.
You know, I want to know, because Matt, a bunch of people use this podcast probably as an escape to escape the depressing things that are happening in this world right now. I'm not too sure involving themselves in your depressing fantasy world is necessarily the first thing that they want.
Unless it is, maybe they're like, "Hey, this guy's equally as depressing."
I'm giving them someone to say, "Wow, I'm so much better than that."
Yeah, you're just a shoulder to cry on. Because you're crying on your other shoulder too.
I was just gonna say maybe Matt is the official fantasy rugby punching bag for the emotional punching bag for everyone. Everyone
I mean, if you're watching, just remember you could probably do better than I could. You could. Are you in the league? No.
I don't know, man.
But you could.
I gotta admit, out of every fantasy I've done, this is hard. But that's what makes it enjoyable. But it is hard.
Hey, that's why it makes those wins feel that much better. And I know that you guys only have a couple under your belt, 3 under your belt in total between the two of you. But hey, they'll come. I know they'll come.
Let's bring it back.
6% of that's me.
Oh, come on. We'll bring it back to a positive note, though. Rugby Atlanta set piece still looks extremely dominant, and Marco Van Jans, Vons, Dons, Mons, Rensburg is still reaping the rewards every week.
Not this week, though. They didn't get you the set piece try assist this week, eh?
What? I was going to bring it up with Commission. I just saw that. I'm about to bring up a dispute with the commission. I'm starting to get fishy vibes over there.
Why? What? Okay, bring up the dispute. What's the dispute?
Well, how else did Marco Jans, Vons, Dons, Rensburg get the try?
Yeah. What do you mean?
Why is it when I have to do anything?
No, they took it back. That was in my control.
He got it on the mall.
No.
Watch it back. Watch the tape. I watched
there
that
was
game.
no
That's
mall.
2 points
Negative.
right there. That gets me to 16.8 points. That's 1 point closer to getting a win.
I don't think so, man. You're going to need a lot more than that. It was going to be a lot more than the foot of Kieran Joyce and the desperation try from Eric Naposki and a potential Von Rensburg maul try that was going to get you into that. So let's talk about some of those fantasy players that performed. And yes, Marco Jan Von Rensburg, 5.7 fantasy points in this one. Justin Basson, 5.6 fantasy points. Alex Mon, 6.1. And kind of the reverse here, guys, with how we're looking at the Rugby New York team, who seems to really be capitalizing on those back play. It looks like if you want a forward, having a Rugby Atlanta forward is something that you may want to have a share of, because it seems like the set pieces and the forward pack of this Rugby Atlanta team.
Every week.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Man, Atlanta just sits guys as much as teams.
That's true. I mean, I think every team is dealing with that volatility as well. So
I think
that's Rugby Atlanta for you.
If you're on Atlanta, you just want Marco Jan Von Zons.
And then let's move on to Old Glory DC here. Old Glory DC still struggling, but there are some fantasy points here. It's just hard to predict who's getting them. In this one, Mike Dabulas, 5.2 fantasy points. Don Bailey, 5.5, and then Old Glory DC getting 2 fantasy points of their own in a try assist as well. So they're able to put up, but not really much with Old Glory DC there. More points than Rugby Atlanta, man.
Your face was.
I just dropped them. I just dropped Old Glory DC. And you're telling me they're getting more points than the guys I just picked up?
Oh.
I told you, Matt.
Oh my god.
We're gonna make a movie about this.
Guys, I'm in on this. Let's move on real quick. Hold on. Actually, I have something to say about DC Old Glory.
No, dude, that just proves the point that you're the launderer, man.
Yeah,
it goes through you, and it comes out more fantasy points on the other end, dude.
Oh my gosh.
You can't blame anyone but yourself. You played yourself.
Oh my gosh.
And Kainoa Lloyd, you dropped. And he got 10.6 on the week. Oh man, man. This is bad. I honestly don't think. I think we could have. I think we could have done this project 100 times. We could have ran this reality 100 times, and this outcome with your team
You think so?
would not happen
Sorry,
in a
Did you
million
just call
years.
this a reality? We're living in a simulation, bro.
All right, there we've
That's
gone
what
there.
I think.
But
I was gonna say DC.
That's what I think. Glaze that over.
apparently with this, well, with Matthew's fantasy results, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a simulation.
Somebody's put my simulation on hard or something, on expert or something. I can't deal with it. Put me
No,
back
it's
on-
just
all mad and I
it's
set mine
just
to
the
pro.
fantasy rugby toggle. It's just fantasy rugby expert difficulty. Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't like it.
But yeah,
Turn
what were you
it
saying,
off.
Matt, about DC?
I was just gonna say that Tusi Tala, I think, is kind of overrated. They always keep talking such great
You
about
want to
him.
take him down with you?
How about Renata Roberts? He's
Tala's
doing all right.
coming down with me. No, but seriously,
know.
I don't know. He had a few good first weeks, but I think his service and the team's just making a lot of mistakes, and I just see Tusi Tala as somebody I can maybe take down with the group.
It's you and Old Glory DC riding in the sunset. It's really heartwarming. It makes all the other people who are doing well in this league, I'm sure, feel a lot better about themselves.
They
Matt. So
should.
I'm sure
That's what I'm
they're
here
appreciating
for.
about that. But yeah,
if you're talking
that
about
is
me, he
the.
does.
That is the recap of round 7 and the fantasy performances. Was a lot of fun breaking all that down. I think the storylines continue to get more interesting and more interesting. Now, just to throw this guys at you, because we did our fantasy rankings last week, just let's do it quickly here. If you had to name top 3 teams that you're kind of looking at heading into round 8, who you think are the top 3 teams heading into the season now that you've seen? Because I feel like a lot more clarity, like I mentioned at the teaser of the show, has kind of surfaced here, and we kind of know who the good teams are and who the bad teams are. So who are your top 3, Vandy? I'm going to start with you, who you think at least, and it can be from consider both fantasy perspective and real rugby perspective going forward.
So you mean I think they differ slightly. I would say my top 3 real teams would be Rugby Atlanta, Gilgronis, and the Legion.
In that order?
Yeah, in that order.
Okay. And then from a fantasy perspective, let's do that. That's an interesting discussion point.
And then from fantasy, I'd probably put Gilgronis. Probably Gilgronis, Rugby Atlanta again, and I'd probably have to say San Diego or Rugby New York. I think New York because it seems they're back guys. They're getting the points week in, week out. You can say the same about the Legion, but it kind of just Joe Peterson. That's the only consistent thing there.
Cool. And then Matt, with you, man, does your rankings change at all? And let's compare fantasy and then non-fantasy.
Yeah. I mean, mine's probably Atlanta, New York, and then New England.
Okay.
For non-fantasy, and then for
All in the
fantasy.
East.
For fantasy, I'll throw a wild one out there, but I think New York, Seattle, and New England Free Jacks, considering that Rugby Atlanta's forward heavy and
You're an Eastern Conference guy, aren't you? I like the West.
A little bit
like
of
the West.
Seawolves there too as well. But yeah, I would have to, I think, agree with Matt. I think it's hard. It's really hard for me to leave Rugby Atlanta out the top just because how effective some of their forwards have. And Matt, I think you do have a point. A lot of it has been Marco Jan van Rensburg. But yeah, interesting to see how kind of that has shifted because I feel like there's a little bit more clarity after round 7. I think we'll get even more in round 8. And for those of you listening, at least from a standings perspective and how the MLR is shaking up, 7 rounds in, topping the Western Conference right now is the Gilgronis sitting at a 5-2 record. Seattle Seawolves, they've been climbing up the rankings sitting at 4-3 record. And then the Legion behind them with 4-3 as well. And then in the Eastern Conference, Rugby Atlanta, Rugby New York, New England Free Jacks, all top of the East, all sitting at a 5-1 record. It looks like the East is very competitive. It's going to be a fun conference to watch. So yeah, guys, that was a fun round 7. Really not many news and notes here to talk about going forward as we shift into round 8, as we wrap up this show, just to look at what matchups you guys are excited about in this upcoming week. There were a few trades
I got news.
Yeah, what's your news, Matt?
Yeah, it doesn't have to do with my team sucking, but this is actually another Canadian.
Fresh.
Another Canadian. I think he played with the Seawolves. a couple of years back. George Barton, friend of Bing Bong Theory,
Okay.
signed with Rugby Atlanta.
Okay. There we go.
So he's
Maybe
had
another
some,
potential to get someone on the show here.
yeah,
More
he's had some
connections.
international experience. Somebody I'll probably throw a Hail Mary on and pick up randomly, but you'll have to find out.
Yeah,
Sorry,
stay
what was
tuned
his name? Just for argument's sake, what was it? Sorry.
Yeah,
And how
curious
do you
George
spell that?
Barton.
I got a little piece of news. I guess not really news. Hey, those commentators for the Utah game were awesome. They were actually awesome.
Wow, I think that's the first time on this show that we've heard a positive thing about the commentators. So,
you know what?
hey, I'm down, man. I'm
Yeah,
love to
let
hear
me-
it.
let
I went
bring
from
a
that
hot
game
negative.
to I can't remember, but I felt like the guy did a phenomenal job. He's engaging.
That's good to hear from a brand new fan. I'm pretty sure Matt's
Yeah.
still listening to the Rugby Network on mute permanently right now. But
I turned the volume on, and then I turned the volume straight on to the commentator trying to explain a scrum penalty when nobody can explain scrum
Hey,
penalties.
tell me right now, was that a knock on to finish that Utah game? That was not. I loosely know the rules, so I don't want to go too heated. I don't need to make a hot mic of it, but that wasn't a knock on. It wasn't.
well, hey, there we go. That just means that just goes to show you, Vandy, that your fanship and your passion for the Utah Warriors is just getting that much deeper.
He's a
just,
Utah warrior, a fake Utah warrior.
Utah Warrior.
We just got to get you kitted up now. But yeah, let's move along here. So yeah, we'll make sure to keep you updated with all the news and notes. I will mention one thing. Go on to the r/MLR rugby community. There's a lot of good content up there, a lot of news up there with the news and notes. They've been really supportive with this project with regards to fantasy rugby. There have been some pretty cool things. One thing was posted by, I think he's a former referee, and he kind of goes into the explanation behind why that DeWalt try was called off, and the TMO explanation behind it. It was kind of just a cool perspective. So interesting tidbits like that are on Reddit, and you'll be able to find our content on there as well. And if you want more of our content, you can join our Discord channel. You can find that on all of our socials. You'll be able to follow us at the Fantasy Ruckers. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow us everywhere with that, and you'll be able to stay in tune with this fantasy rugby league and our journey in making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And now, as we kind of wrap up this show here with the final about 10 minutes here, guys, let's just talk about this upcoming fantasy week with regards to the matchups that we have. Just for all of our league members, we are now rolling into round 8. The playoffs begin in round 15. The 15th round is the last regular season matchup for this fantasy league. And then weeks 16 and 17 will be the semifinal and final. The top 4 teams in our league will make it. And remember, every single team that beats Vandy will be getting additional $25. I believe $25 donated, or additional $10, I think, donated to charity, in addition to the lump sum $100 that is for our prize winner. Yeah, make sure you continue to follow. So the reset of the matchups will begin this week. So whoever you played in round 1 is the team that you're going to be playing in round 8. And I believe, guys, that means Vandy and Matt are going back at each other again this week.
You are so lucky.
So one of you will be getting a dub this week.
You're lucky, man. You get to play a wiener.
Oh, are the Legion on bye?
Yeah.
The Legion are on bye, and that's Matt's Vandy's source of.
Hey, don't worry. I don't have a kicker either.
You're the only. Oh, I needed that one.
I have no kicker. Kieran, good.
Well, okay, guys, let's talk about the games that you're looking forward to. We'll give some names for waiver wire pickups, and then we'll wrap up the show as Vandy tries to figure out how he's going to beat Matt this week without Joe Peterson. Some matchups here. It starts off on Saturday, I believe, and we have 2 3:00 matchups, a 6 o'clock, a 7 o'clock, and then a 3 o'clock on Sunday, I believe. So we start off with Old Glory DC taking on the Nolah Gold. A big matchup here in Atlanta. Rugby Atlanta taking on the New England Free Jacks at 3 o'clock. Seattle Seawolves taking on the Giltinis at 6. Another good matchup. Utah Warriors taking on the Sabercats. Sabercats coming off of that bye. And then Rugby New York taking on the Toronto Arrows at home. Guys, out of those matchups, what are you looking most forward to? And which one do you think will have the most fantasy points in it?
I I think the Rugby Atlanta New England Free Jacks game is going to be fun to watch. But I'm actually looking forward to Old Glory DC versus Nolah Gold because I think Old Glory DC has a chance of pulling out a win here.
Hey,
There we go.
There you go.
And that would mean that they would be able to get their first dub of the season. Do you think Old Glory is a better team than Nolah, or do you think they're bound to pull one out of the bag here?
No, I think, matchup. There's two teams that are kind of at the bottom of the barrel. And I think they're just bound to get something.
Kind of like so does that mean that
you stole it from me. I was gonna say it. It's like me versus Matt.
I was just gonna say, right?
It's me versus.
I was just gonna say it's an Old Glory DC.
If Old Glory DC wins, I win.
As soon as you chimed up, Ryan, I knew it was coming.
Randy,
I was
I'm
just
about
gonna
to
say
pick up
this
all
is an
the Old
exact
Glory DC
mirror
players.
image of what your guys' matchup is. So I think I'm just gonna be tuning into this just because of the parallels between that storyline and the storyline of your guys' matchup in round 8 with regards to fantasy. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this Rugby Atlanta New England Free Jacks match. I think the Seattle Seawolves and Giltini's match is gonna be a lot of fun to watch. I think we're gonna see whether or not Giltini start to turn the page in terms of figuring things out against a really solid Seattle Seawolves team, and then we'll get to figure out whether or not the Seawolves team is the real thing after looking pretty dominant against a weak Dallas Jackals team. And I think with regards to fantasy points, I mean, I think any of these matchups really could have a bunch of fantasy points on both sides. I think that's what you're looking for, because I think I've noticed that even when you have these lopsided matchups, sometimes there's just not a lot of fantasy points there to be had. It's just a couple players that are being dominant. But when you have those matches with, both sides really, really doing well, that's when you get a lot of fantasy points just as a whole. So I think matches like the Rugby Atlanta Free Jacks one, Seattle Seawolves and Giltini's will have a lot of points there. So you can turn to those matchups as well. Quickly, guys, as we wrap up the show here, a little bit out of order, but Matt, I know you were trying to cook up some names here, and I know both of you are trying to figure out, especially with the Legion on bye, Vandy, you'll have to obviously make up some fantasy waiver wire pickups as well. So anyone on the list so far that kind of catches your attention? You don't need to give anything away, Matt.
No, I'll give it all away. It's all good.
Okay, give it all away.
Yeah, I don't think they'll want to listen to me anyways, but I'm going to say it anyways. I like Nick Feeks, whether he's starting or coming off the bench. Seems like he's a try scoring machine. I think that's 3 out of the 7 weeks he scored over 5 points, so he's going to try in each one of those games. Luke Burden is in the waiver wire. It looks like he has the kicking duties for Giltini's, as long as even with in the lineup. Seems like he has the kicking duty, so if you're looking for a kicker, Vandy, we're basically going to be duking it out for him.
Is Talapusi playing next week?
Well, I don't know. I guess we'll have to keep an eye out for that lineup.
Does he kick?
He does kick. He does kick.
Coleman had a good game.
And that, Vandy, I will say, Vandy, I keep an eye out for that, because that you will need to follow. You follow that Utah Warriors Twitter page, and you wait for that lineup, because it is going to be interesting between Talapusi, between Kurt Coleman, and I believe they have one more name as well. Let me pull it up here. Is it? Wait, no, it's not Utah Warriors. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Rugby Atlanta. Yaquin de la Vega Mendia. He's also on that team as well. And he hasn't shown up in a few weeks. And he was their kicker at the start. So you keep an eye out, Vandy, of how that fly half situation happens, because you have Talapusi. Hokie just picked up Kurt Coleman, and De La Vega Mendia is on Rugby Morning Squad. So each of you have a piece at that fly half spot, and it's going to be interesting how that plays out in round 8, because yes, the lineups, to say that at least, have been very volatile for every single team in the MLR. Those are some pretty good names, Matt.
I can't believe I play you with Joe on bye.
So some other names that I want to bring up as some prominent players. Slade McDowell, if you're looking for a back row player, he didn't start this week, but he still made an impact when he subbed on. It seemed like not really a fantasy performer, but in week 6, 13.6 points, week 5, 6.1 fantasy points. And then I'm just moving over here to see how he did in round 7. And in round 7, he still put up a try assist and got 2 of his own off of the bench. So he's getting you consistent points. So maybe Slade McDowell is someone you consider. Paula Balakana, he's kind of a boomer bust type of guy. He's had weeks where he's scored try. You're just really looking for that try. He's on a New England team that is pretty successful. And you mentioned Luke Burden, Matt. Kainoa Lloyd, he's there as well. He was recently dropped, and he also went through the laundering system of Matthew Yeast, so the chances that he will continue to get points is pretty high here.
Until I pick him up.
I'm gonna beat you with Ryberg.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
should.
pick him up, and I'm
Do
gonna
it.
beat you with John Ryberg.
Pick him up and beat me with Ryberg.
There you go.
It
And I'm going to leave it at that because, yes, I'll just say that John Ryberg is also available. And we know
the quadricep with eyeballs.
and we know how much Vandy loves John Ryberg, even though he hasn't really stepped on the field this season. I think the impression he made, that impression that he made on him in the finals in that very first MLR match that Vandy watched must have made a pretty big impression.
Quadricep
with
eyeballs or the bum with splinters because he's just riding pine the whole time.
Oh, there we go. So we'll see whether or not Ryberg can is amongst our waiver wire pickups here, and we'll see whether or not Vandy is the one that maybe puts in a bid for him.
I'm playing.
We'll see whether or not. I don't know. It's been hard to predict with those lineups. So with that being said, that is episode number 11, breaking down round 7, looking ahead to round 8 with a little bit of waiver wires and a little bit of therapy session for both Matthew and Vandy, who are struggling so far in this season. But we're hoping here after 7 rounds of play, things are going to turn around and we can make that little playoff push here, guys, and get you guys into the playoffs competing. I mean, there is only 4 spots in, and we'd have to take 50% of that for you two to go in. But hey, we'll never say never. Anything is possible. To all of our league members who are listening, make sure you stay tuned and up to date here on our Discord channel. Make sure you're keeping an eye out for any updates. Have been a little bit behind this week with the rankings and the stats, but those will be released along with this podcast, so you'll be able to check that out. The results have been released on our league spreadsheet, so you'll be able to see all the latest results there, and then the waiver wires will run later this week ahead of round 8 matchups. And yeah, if you're just tuning in and you want to follow along this league and you're not a league member, that's okay, but make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, where you can follow along and see how this league is developing and just keeping the Major League Rugby fantasy conversation going, because it's been fun so far 7 rounds into the 2022 season. So with that being said, for Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for following us along this fantasy rugby journey, and we will see you next time.
Adios.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.